It was nearly midnight. Nurse Hannah Brooks had already clocked out after a 12-hour shift. She was only a few steps from the hospital exit when she heard a quiet sigh behind her. She turned. An elderly patient sat alone in a wheelchair outside room 214. His dinner tray was untouched. His eyes never left the empty hallway. Hannah walked over with a gentle smile.
Good evening, sir. Is everything all right?
Everything's fine, my dear. I'm just waiting for my grandson. He promised we'd have dinner together.
Has he called?
No, but knowing him, something important must have come up.
Until he gets here, how about? You don't have to eat alone? No one should ever have to feel alone.
Standing silently outside the hospital room, a man in a dark suit had watched everything. He wasn't just another visitor. He was the old man's grandson, one of the youngest billionaires in America. For the first time in years, he saw his grandfather smiling the way he had before loneliness stole the light from his eyes. As he watched the young nurse laugh beside him, one question kept echoing in his mind. Who was this woman? And why did she already feel like part of his family? Daniel Bennett stood frozen at the end of the hallway. He had rushed straight from the airport, still wearing the same dark suit from a board meeting that had run hours longer than expected. His phone had died during the flight. By the time he landed, every road into the city seemed determined to keep him away from the one person who mattered most: his grandfather. Now, standing outside room 214, guilt weighed heavily on his chest. He had promised they would have dinner together. Instead, a complete stranger had kept that promise for him. He watched through the small glass window as the young nurse laughed at one of Arthur's old stories. Arthur laughed so hard, he nearly knocked over the chessboard. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his grandfather laugh like that. Not since his grandmother passed away 5 years earlier. He quietly stepped back into the shadows, unwilling to interrupt the precious moment unfolding before him. A few minutes later, Hannah stood from her chair. She carefully helped Arthur back into bed. She adjusted his blanket, placed his reading glasses on the bedside table, then smiled. "I'll check on you first thing tomorrow morning." Arthur reached for her hand. "Thank you, my dear. You gave an old man the happiest birthday he's had in years." Hannah gently squeezed his hand. "You gave me the best ending to a very long shift." Arthur chuckled. "Then I suppose we helped each other." She smiled one last time before walking toward the door. The moment she stepped into the hallway, she nearly bumped into Daniel. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. Daniel smiled politely. "No, that was my fault." She noticed the overnight bag in his hand and the worry on his face. "You must be Mr. Bennett's grandson." He nodded. "I am." She smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry. He's been smiling all evening." Daniel looked through the glass at his grandfather, then back at her. "I don't know how to thank you." Hannah shook her head. "You don't have to. I was only doing what I hoped someone would do for my own grandfather." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hannah gave him one last warm smile. "Go on. He's been waiting for you." Daniel watched her walk away down the quiet hallway until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did he enter the room. Arthur looked up and smiled. "You finally made it." Daniel walked over and hugged his grandfather tightly. "I'm sorry I was late." Arthur smiled knowingly. "You were. But thanks to a very special nurse." He glanced toward the door Hannah had just walked through. "I was never alone." The next morning, Hannah arrived at the hospital 15 minutes before her shift began. As she walked past room 214, she couldn't help but peek inside. Arthur was already awake, struggling to reach the curtains. She smiled and walked in. "Good morning. You're awake early." Arthur laughed. "When you get to my age, sleep becomes a luxury." Hannah opened the curtains, letting the warm morning sunlight fill the room. "There," she said with a smile. "Much better." "It certainly is," Arthur replied, "although I was talking about you, not the sunshine." Hannah couldn't help but laugh. "You certainly know how to flatter people." "I only tell the truth," Arthur said with a wink. Just then, the door opened. Daniel walked in carrying a fresh bouquet of white lilies and Arthur's favorite breakfast from a nearby cafe. "I figured I owed you one proper birthday breakfast." Arthur's face lit up. "You remembered." "I'll always remember," Daniel said quietly. As he placed the flowers on the table, he looked at Hannah. "I wanted to thank you again for last night." She smiled politely. "You already did." "I don't think I thanked you enough." "There isn't anything to thank me for. You made my grandfather happy." Hannah looked at Arthur before answering. "Sometimes people don't need expensive medicine. They just need someone willing to sit beside them." Daniel found himself smiling. Most people spoke to him differently the moment they learned who he was. They praised his success, his money, his company. But this nurse, she didn't seem interested in any of that. She simply cared about people. Before leaving the room, Hannah noticed Arthur trying to hide a cough. "I'll be right back." A few minutes later, she returned with warm tea, adjusted his pillows, checked his medication, and reminded him to eat slowly. Daniel watched every little thing she did. None of it felt forced. She treated his grandfather with the same care she would have given anyone. After Hannah left the room, Arthur picked up his cup of tea and smiled. "You've been watching that young lady more than you've been watching me." Daniel laughed softly. "I was watching the best nurse in this hospital." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "No." He smiled knowingly. "You were watching the woman who's slowly stealing your heart." Daniel shook his head with a grin. "I met her less than 24 hours ago." Arthur chuckled. "My dear boy, the heart has never needed a calendar to recognize someone special." Daniel didn't answer, but as he glanced toward the hallway where Hannah had disappeared, for the first time in a very long time, he found himself hoping tomorrow would come a little faster. 3 days later, Arthur was finally strong enough to leave the intensive care unit. The doctors were amazed by how quickly he had recovered. That afternoon, Hannah helped him pack the few belongings he had brought to the hospital. "You'll be going home today," she said with a smile. Arthur looked around the room. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'll miss this place." Hannah laughed. "I think you're the only patient who's ever said that." Arthur reached into the drawer beside his bed and carefully took out a small cream-colored envelope. "I have something for you." Hannah immediately shook her head. "Oh no, Mr. Bennett. If it's money, I can't accept it." Arthur smiled. "Who said anything about money?" She looked at him curiously. "It's just a letter. I want you to read it, but not until after I've gone home." Reluctantly, Hannah accepted it. "I'll keep it safe." Just then, Daniel walked into the room. "Ready to go home, Grandpa?" Arthur grinned. "I've been ready since breakfast." As the hospital porter wheeled Arthur toward the elevator, he turned back one last time. "Goodbye, my dear." "No." He smiled warmly. "I think, see you again sounds much better." Hannah waved as the elevator doors slowly closed. For the first time in days, the hospital hallway felt strangely quiet. That evening, after finishing another long shift, Hannah remembered the envelope. She opened it. Inside wasn't a check. There wasn't any money. Just a single handwritten letter. It read, "My dear Hannah, thank you for reminding an old man that kindness still exists in this world. If my late wife were alive today, she would have loved you as much as I do. You once told me no one deserves to feel alone. I hope you never forget those words, because one day, when life blesses you with a family of your own, they will become the luckiest people in the world." By the time Hannah reached the last sentence, tears filled her eyes. She folded the letter carefully and whispered, "I'll treasure this forever." She had no idea. Someone else had already read those same words. Daniel. Nearly 2 weeks passed. Life at the hospital returned to its usual rhythm. Hannah threw herself back into her work, caring for one patient after another. She never expected to hear from the Bennett family again. Then, one afternoon, the hospital receptionist approached her. "Hannah, there's someone asking for you in the visitors' lounge." She frowned. "For me?" The receptionist smiled. "He says his name is Daniel." Curious, Hannah walked into the lounge. Daniel stood by the window, holding a small gift bag. The moment he saw her, he smiled. "I hope I'm not interrupting your shift." She smiled politely. "My lunch break just started." "What brings you back?" Daniel handed her the gift bag. "My grandfather asked me to deliver this." Hannah looked surprised. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I know." He smiled, "but I promised him I would." She slowly opened the bag. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal. She looked up, confused. Daniel laughed softly. "My grandfather noticed something." "What?" "You write little notes to every patient before they go home." Hannah looked embarrassed. "They're just little encouragement cards." "He kept every single one." She was speechless. Daniel continued, "He wanted you to have a notebook worthy of someone whose words bring comfort to people." For a moment, Hannah couldn't find the right words. Finally, she whispered, "Please thank him for me." "I will." There was a brief silence. Then Daniel smiled. "Actually, he asked me to invite you to dinner this Friday." Hannah's eyes widened. "Dinner?" "He insists it's not a thank you dinner. It's just..." Daniel chuckled. "An old man who misses his favorite nurse." Hannah laughed for the first time since Arthur left the hospital. "Well, I suppose I can't disappoint my favorite patient." Daniel smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say yes." As Hannah returned to her shift, she didn't notice the smile on her own face. And for the first time in years, Daniel walked away looking forward to Friday more than his next billion-dollar business meeting. Friday evening arrived sooner than Hannah expected. After finishing her shift, she changed into a simple navy blue dress, tied her hair neatly behind her shoulders, and drove to the address Arthur had given her. As the gate slowly opened, Hannah's eyes widened. The driveway stretched farther than she could see. Beautiful gardens surrounded a breathtaking mansion. She whispered to herself, "I think I have the wrong address." Before she could reach for her phone, the front door opened. Arthur stepped outside with a huge smile. "I was beginning to think my favorite nurse had forgotten about an old man." Hannah laughed in relief. "So, you really do live here?" Arthur grinned. "My grandson likes to call it home. I still think it's too big." Just then, Daniel walked outside. "I'm glad you came." Hannah smiled politely. I almost turned around. Daniel looked confused. Why? She laughed softly. I've never had dinner in a place that looks like it belongs in a movie. Daniel smiled. My grandfather says the same thing every week. Arthur interrupted with a chuckle. And I'm still right. The three of them walked inside together. Instead of a formal dining room, Arthur led them to a cozy glass sunroom overlooking a peaceful lake behind the estate. The table was simple. Fresh flowers, homemade soup, warm bread, nothing extravagant. Hannah looked around in surprise. I thought billionaires ate fancy meals every night. Daniel laughed. My grandfather says soup tastes better than expensive food. Arthur nodded proudly, especially when someone else is paying. The three of them burst into laughter. For the next 2 hours, they shared stories instead of business talk. Arthur told embarrassing stories about Daniel as a little boy. He was terrified of butterflies. Daniel covered his face. Grandpa, you promised never to tell anyone. Arthur laughed even harder. Oh, I made no such promise. Hannah couldn't stop laughing. It was the hardest she had laughed in years. As the evening came to an end, Arthur quietly watched the two of them talking near the garden doors. A gentle smile spread across his face. He whispered to himself, My dear Evelyn, I think our grandson has finally found someone who sees his heart instead of his fortune. He looked toward the stars, and I have a feeling you'd have loved her. A few days after dinner, Hannah had the day off. On her way home from the grocery store, she noticed a small crowd gathered outside a neighborhood pharmacy. An elderly woman sat on a bench, quietly wiping tears from her face. People glanced at her, but no one stopped. Hannah walked over. Ma'am, are you all right? The woman hesitated before answering. I came to pick up my husband's heart medication. She looked down at the prescription. I thought I had enough money, but the price went up this morning. Hannah looked at the receipt. Without saying a word, she reached into her purse and paid for the medicine. The elderly woman stared at her in disbelief. My dear, I can't let you do that. Hannah smiled gently. Then promise me you'll use this money to buy him his favorite dessert instead. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She hugged Hannah tightly. God bless you. Hannah simply smiled, waved goodbye, and continued walking home. She never noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Daniel had been driving back from a meeting when traffic slowed near the pharmacy. From inside his car, he had witnessed everything. His driver finally spoke. Should I pull over, sir? Daniel slowly shook his head. No. He couldn't take his eyes off Hannah. She hadn't looked around to see if anyone was watching. She hadn't asked for recognition. She hadn't even told the woman her name. She had simply seen someone in need and helped. That evening, Daniel visited Arthur. His grandfather smiled the moment he walked through the door. You've got that look again. Daniel laughed. What look? The one that tells me you're thinking about Hannah. Daniel sat down quietly. After a long silence, he smiled to himself. You know what amazes me most? Arthur looked at him. What? Daniel answered softly. She has no idea how extraordinary she is. Arthur smiled. The kindest people never do. The following Saturday, Arthur invited Hannah to join them for lunch at the estate once again. After lunch, the three of them decided to take a walk through the gardens. Arthur suddenly stopped beneath a large oak tree. You two go ahead, he said with a grin. These old knees need a little rest. Daniel smiled knowingly. We won't be long." As they strolled along the garden path, Hannah noticed something unusual. Near the back gate stood a small wooden table. Several elderly neighbors were gathered around it, chatting happily over tea and fresh pastries. She looked at Daniel. "I didn't know your family hosted community events." Daniel smiled. "We don't." She looked confused. "Then, who are they?" Daniel pointed toward the little table. "Mrs. Wilson lost her husband 3 years ago. Mr. Harris has no children. The couple over there can't drive anymore. So," he shrugged. "Every Saturday, my grandfather and I invite them over for lunch." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "You do this every week?" Daniel nodded. "It started after my grandmother passed away. My grandfather told me loneliness can be just as painful as illness. So we promised each other that as long as we could, no one around us would have to spend their weekends alone." For a moment, Hannah couldn't speak. She had spent weeks wondering if the kindness she saw in Arthur had somehow skipped a generation. Now she knew. It hadn't. Just then, one of the elderly women called out, "Daniel!" He walked over immediately. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her wheelchair and adjusted the blanket covering her legs. "Is that better?" She smiled. "Much better. Thank you, dear." Hannah watched quietly from a distance. There were no cameras, no reporters, no business partners, just a man giving his time to people who needed it. Daniel returned a few moments later. Hannah smiled. "I owe you an apology." He looked surprised. "For what?" She laughed softly. "I assumed billionaires spent their weekends on yachts." Daniel grinned. "I've never even owned one." They both laughed. For the first time, Hannah stopped seeing Daniel as simply Arthur's grandson. She began seeing the kind, thoughtful man behind the title. And somewhere between shared laughter, warm tea, and a peaceful afternoon, the first quiet spark of love found its way into both of their hearts. The following Saturday, the Bennett estate was alive with laughter. Unlike the extravagant parties Daniel had hosted in the past, Arthur's birthday celebration was exactly as he had wanted. A gathering filled with family, close friends, neighbors, and the people who had become part of his life. As Hannah stepped through the garden gate, she smiled at the sight before her. Children chased one another across the lawn. Neighbors shared homemade desserts beneath white garden tents. Soft music floated through the afternoon air. It felt less like the birthday of a billionaire and more like a family reunion. Before she had taken 3 steps, Arthur spotted her. "There she is!" His face lit up as he walked toward her. "My favorite nurse actually came." Hannah laughed and hugged him gently. "I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything." Arthur smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Daniel soon joined them, looking unusually relaxed. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I," Hannah replied. The afternoon passed with warmth and laughter. Arthur insisted Hannah sit beside him during lunch. He proudly introduced her to everyone he met. "This is Hannah Brooks, the young woman who reminded me that kindness still exists." Each introduction left Hannah blushing. Later that afternoon, Arthur stood to thank everyone for coming. "I've celebrated many birthdays. Some were filled with luxury, others with important people. But today," he looked around the garden, "I'm surrounded by people who truly care about one another. And at my age, I've learned that love and friendship are life's greatest treasures." The guests applauded warmly. As the celebration slowly came to an end, neighbors began saying their goodbyes. The garden grew quieter. Arthur turned to Daniel with a knowing smile. "Why don't you walk Hannah to the lake? It's the most beautiful part of the estate this time of day." Daniel smiled. "I'd like that." They strolled slowly along the peaceful lakeside path. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were birds singing and the gentle breeze moving through the trees. Finally, Daniel stopped walking. "Hannah." She looked up. "Yes." He took a slow breath. "Do you remember the first night we met?" She smiled softly. "I do." "I thought you were just a worried grandson." Daniel laughed quietly. "I was." His smile faded into something more sincere. "But that night, I watched you stay beside my grandfather after your shift had already ended. You didn't know who he was. You didn't know who I was. You simply couldn't bear the thought of someone eating alone." He looked into her eyes. That was the moment everything changed for me. Hannah felt her heart racing. Daniel continued, "You taught me something I'll never forget. Success means very little if you don't have someone kind enough to share your life with." He reached into his jacket pocket, then slowly knelt on one knee. Hannah gasped. Daniel opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring. "Hannah Brooks, you walked into my grandfather's life when he needed hope. You walked into my life when I didn't even realize my heart was searching for someone. I don't want to imagine another tomorrow without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Hannah's eyes. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. For a few seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded through happy tears. "Yes. Yes, Daniel. I'll marry you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger before gently pulling her into his arms. As they shared their first kiss, neither of them noticed Arthur watching quietly from the terrace. A tear rolled down his cheek. He smiled toward the evening sky and whispered, "My dear Evelyn, our grandson found the woman you always prayed he'd meet. And I know you'd have loved her." As the sun disappeared behind the lake, two hearts began a new chapter together. Neither of them realized their greatest adventure was only just beginning. 1 year later, the chapel doors slowly opened. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows as Hannah, dressed in a breathtaking white wedding gown, walked down the aisle. Her eyes never left Daniel. Waiting at the altar, he smiled through tears. For the first time since they had met, neither of them needed words. They already knew they had found the person they wanted to spend the rest of their lives with. Arthur, seated in the front row, quietly wiped away a tear. He whispered to himself, "Evelyn, if only you could see them now." Moments later, Daniel gently slipped a wedding band onto Hannah's finger. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you for the rest of my life." Hannah smiled through happy tears. "And I promise to choose you every single day." The minister smiled warmly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." As their family and friends erupted into applause, Daniel kissed Hannah. Arthur was the first to stand, the loudest to clap, the happiest man in the room. 8 months later, the Bennett mansion had become much livelier. Daniel had transformed into the world's most overprotective husband. Every morning, he insisted on making Hannah breakfast before she left for work. Every doctor's appointment was already marked on his calendar weeks in advance. Every evening, he would kneel beside her, gently resting his hand on her growing baby bump. "Good evening, little one," he would say with a smile. "Daddy's home. Hannah would laugh every single time. One afternoon, Arthur walked into the living room and found Daniel reading a parenting book for the third time. He chuckled. "You've negotiated billion-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat. But one baby has turned you into the most nervous man in America." Daniel laughed. "I know. I just want to get everything right." Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already have. The day you learn to love with your heart instead of your wallet." A few weeks later, Daniel's phone rang in the middle of a meeting. He saw Hannah's name. The moment he answered, she laughed softly. "I think our baby is ready to meet us." Within minutes, Daniel was racing toward the hospital. Hours later, the sound of a newborn baby's cry filled the delivery room. Daniel stood beside Hannah, tears streaming down his face. "You are incredible." He kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you." The nurse carefully placed a healthy baby boy into Hannah's arms. She smiled down at him. "Hello, my little miracle." A short while later, Arthur quietly entered the room. His hands trembled as Daniel gently placed the baby into his arms. For several long moments, Arthur simply stared at his great-grandson. Then he looked at Hannah, his eyes filled with grateful tears. "My dear, the night you refused to let an old man eat alone, you had no idea you were giving me something far greater than your kindness. You gave me hope. You gave my grandson love. And today," he smiled at the tiny baby sleeping peacefully in his arms, "you gave me the greatest gift of all. My family." Silence filled the room, not because there was nothing to say, but because every heart already understood. As Daniel wrapped one arm around Hannah and gently touched his son's tiny hand, the loneliness that had once surrounded Arthur's life was nothing more than a distant memory. The room was now filled with laughter, with love, and with 3 generations brought together by one simple act of kindness. Sometimes, the smallest decision changes the course of an entire lifetime. For Hannah, it began with staying beside an elderly man who didn't deserve to eat alone. For Daniel, it began the moment he witnessed genuine kindness. And for Arthur, it ended exactly as he had always hoped, surrounded by the family he thought he would never have again. Before you leave, I have one small request. If this story made you smile, cry, or simply reminded you that good people still exist, don't let it end here. Share this story with just one person you care about. One share could brighten someone's day more than you realize. And if you're one of those people who believes kindness still has a place in this world, subscribe and become part of this family. Every week, we bring you stories that remind us love, compassion, and hope are never out of style. And if you don't want the emotions to end, I've left a collection of my favorite billionaire love stories in the description. I think you'll love every one of them. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the power of one kind act.